In this video, we are going to cover the FasTest family of bail connectors, which include the CGA 540, 580, 590, and 346.
Yeah, and these connectors are very common in the industry. There's, 15 plus years of use and service, thousands of these connectors out there. And there's many options. You've got a lever handle here, cable handle shown here, different styles of rigid bail. You got RPV options as well, and O-ring material options, along with material options in the connector as well. And they work very easily, push on and actuate the bail, and they're on.
And depending on your application, you want to make sure you have the correct configuration with those connectors. Like Jason mentioned, RPVs require different size handle. Again, material compatibility. That's some of the things you want to be careful about when you're ordering connectors. So FasTest, we're happy to help you with that. So in this video, we're going to cover installation, operation, maintenance, and at the end, we'll cover some tips and tricks and do's and don'ts just to kind of tie things off.
Installing these connectors is very easy. First, you're going to want to take your high pressure hose and make sure you use approved thread sealant on the connector, on the male quarter-inch MPT, and you will fasten with the wrench flats that are on the connector and the hose. You don't want to torque with the connector, and you don't want to over tighten either. Also, you'll want to tighten until it's in the correct orientation per your fill rack design. If you have all your cylinders in a line, in a linear fashion, you want to make sure the connectors are facing the valve. If you do have a swivel on the hoses or on the connector, this isn't necessary. Things will obviously turn there. So, yeah.
And kind of like what Jason just touched on, you want to make sure you have a long enough hose so that the cord connector is orientated properly and it allows the connector to sit correctly on the valve. If the hose is too short, or if it doesn't have the correct orientation, it'll want to lean the connector on its side, which is not going to give you a good connection. You want to make sure the hose is long enough also to allow for ease of use and handling the connector. If it's too short, it's going to be very difficult to get on the valve and connect. A little bit longer length allows freedom of movement to make a good connection. Operation of these bail connectors is real simple, but before we do that, we definitely want to cover inspection.
Yeah, before you shift, you're going to want to make sure that the handle operates smoothly. You're going to want to make sure that your front O-ring here is in good condition. There's no rips or tears or chunks taken out of it. If so, you're going to want to replace those. Also, you want to take a peek at the stop pin in the back here. Make sure that that's fully retracted when there's no pressure present and that there's no damage.
You also want to make sure you inspect the RPV pin on these connectors. Make sure there's no damage to that RPV pin. Make sure it's not bent. You want to make sure it's able to retract or extend smoothly. Depending on your application, which you're filling, you want to make sure that that pin is extended or retracted. And if you're not filling an RPV valve, you'll want to make sure it's retracted, because if it is extended, it may interact with the interior of the valve.
Yeah, and we've got this RPV tool that you can use. Sometimes you can use a leather glove or pliers, but we do recommend using this RPV tool as it does not damage the pin. So yeah, it's very easy. Push in the quarter turn. You can get the pin to come out or the pin to go in. Push in, rotate, and it'll lock in. All right, and then now that you got your RPV pin in the condition that you want it to be in, you want to just make sure that your collets, these are the collets, they're the threaded segments that connect directly to your valve. You want to make sure that those look like they're in good condition, there's no bending. And then just any other damage that you see to it, you might want to take note of. If these were dropped and there's a dent in the sleeve here, that could impede correct function of your connectors. So yeah, we're on to operation.
As I mentioned earlier, operating this connector is real simple, and it starts with making sure that the bail is completely open. Having the bail completely open allows for full thread engagement on the valves. Now, once it's fully open, you want to make sure that the connector is properly aligned. You don't want it at an angle. If it's at an angle, it's going to sit weird. You're not going to get a good connection. You want to make sure it's properly aligned. Once it's properly aligned, there's inside here on the inside of this 540 connector, we have a flat surface that sits along the piston, and you want to make sure that matches up nice and flush with the valve. And you should be able to compress this connector back and forth here, and you should feel that spring movement. Push it against the valve, hold that position, and then you can release the bail to establish a connection. And if you do it right, the connector should go down with relative ease, establishing a good connection. And it allows the bail to be fully down past this 90 degrees here, which is going to allow the piston to travel forward and make that complete connection.
And there are a few different things on a cable style connector. You can see this has a cable handle with the additional safety latch here. So in order to open the bail handle on a connector like this, you want to push up on the safety latch, and then you'll be able to open up your bail handle. You can do that one-handed. It's fairly easy to do. So you want to be able to do that. And then on the 580, things look a little different as well. So one of the differences, your O-ring now is a little more exposed, so you're gonna want to take even more care and not put it in at an angle, as you can damage that O-ring. So again, line up the valve with the connector, push it in, and again, you can see it's not an internal spring, but we have an external sleeve here that you'll make contact with the face of the valve, and then give it an additional push. And now you're able to drop the bail handle. And again, it should go down real easy. Drop the bail handle and make your connection. Now, sometimes your bail handle will not go down easily and things might jam up a little bit. So a tip here is, if that happens and things don't seem to line up, grab your collet set. You can grab these with your fingers and turn it 180 degrees. And now what you've done is created a situation where maybe before you were peak to peak on the threads between the connector and the valve, and it was jamming up, and now you're peak to valley and it should engage fully. That's a rare occurrence, but that's a little tip that you can use to alleviate that issue.
So now that we've made a connection with our connector, we want to make sure that we made a good connection. And with this 540 connector here, the first thing that we did is we want to make sure that the bail handle has traveled all the way down past 90 degrees and is basically resting on the neck of this valve. After that, you want to make sure that we got full thread engagement. And what I mean by that is, again, with this 540 connector, minimal threads are showing right here on the valve. If we have a lot of threads showing, the connector may not be properly aligned. It might not be fully engaged with the threads. Again, you want to make sure that there's very minimal threads exposed on the connector. Jason, do you want to talk about the good connection on a 580?
Yeah, on the 580, it's similar, although it looks a little different to the 540. So you're going to want to make sure you're pushed all the way in. If you aren't pushed all the way in, there will be some exposed threads, as you can see here. This is a bad connection. You've got exposed threads. We've got an indicator line here on this sleeve that should mostly disappear if you're connected properly. So we line it up, push it on, and then let it fall. So now you've got a good connection. No visible threads. The indicator line is also gone. Again, this is a cable handle, so in order to open the connector, use the cable latch. So once you are connected, you're going to perform your fill process. So, vent, vac, fill. You're going to check your stop pin operation. You can do that during the fill. I will tilt this connector here to show you the stop pin. This pin will pop out during the fill process at around 150 psi. That will prevent you from removing the connector under pressure. You will want to, if you ever try to remove it under pressure, it will stop here, and obviously you're not going to want to force that. You can damage that pin. When your fill process is complete, you will want to vent your pressure from your manifold. As you do that, this stop pin will retract back into the body of the connector, and then you are safe to remove the connector. And again, to do that with a cable handle, make sure you use the latch. You can do that one-handed and remove the connector.
Once you're done with your fill, kind of handy little tip with these connectors for the cable or a normal rigid bail is, when you're done, you can hang them right here by the bail, anywhere, like on another valve handle, up on your rack, wherever it is. It's good to get these out of the way and hang them up. You don't want them dangling down between cylinders. That's how they get damaged pretty easily. So feel free to store them right there by the bail.
Maintenance on the bail handle series of connectors is very easy, and it's very similar across the different versions of these bail handles connectors that we have. Most of the maintenance that you'll be performing revolves around this front O-ring here. You will need to do that approximately every 3 months or 1,000 cycles depending on your usage. That's very easy. Other things that you may have to do if you get them damaged is replace this stop pin. We have a kit for that, and potentially replacing this RPV pin right here if that gets damaged or bent. Replacing the front O-ring on the bail handle connectors is very easy. You will want a pick, preferably one that isn't too sharp so that you can't damage the piston, and then the proper seal set for the connector that you got. And if you have any questions on that, please contact FasTest. But this is the correct kit for the CGA 580 connector, which we have here. So first step is to remove the old O-ring, and to do that, use a pick and try to get under that O-ring. If you have a sharp pick, you can poke it and get it out, but I like just digging under, and that way you don't have to worry about damaging the piston underneath. Pretty easy to get under that O-ring and just work it out. Discard the old O-ring. You grab a new one from your new pack, and I do recommend using FasTest only O-rings. They are cleaned and the correct material, clean for oxygen service. So it's very easy. You just set it in the groove and work it around. And also, I would recommend not using any lubrication on this. Lubrication in this application here at the front of the connector would tend to just collect any dirt or grime from the fill plant. Keeping it dry has no repercussions like that, and it'll keep things a little cleaner. Replacing the stop pin may be necessary if you're experiencing some leakage in this area of the connector. This is the stop pin. This comes out under pressure and prevents removal of the connector from the cylinder valve. If there's still residual pressure in the system and you try to remove it, sometimes that can damage the pin as well and prevent it from retracting, and then you've got the issue of making it very difficult to remove the connector. So in that case, we do have a stop pin kit, which we end up replacing this. And to replace the stop pin, you will need a few tools. You'll need a proper Allen wrench, and in this case, this is a lever or a cable style connector. So the size you'll need is an 1/8 inch, or a 3 millimeter can work. For a rigid bail that looks like this, you will need a 5/32, or 4 millimeter can also work. You also need some Loctite 242 or equivalent for when you replace this handle. This handle will need to come off, and you also need a 1/2 inch socket. So we can get started here. First thing on a cable style or even the rigid bail handle style is to remove a screw. On the rigid bail, there's just one screw to remove. On the cable style or lever style, there are 2 screws, but you really only need to remove one. So we'll go ahead and remove this screw here. Set the screw aside. You will be reusing that later. And then you can pull out this cam. Set that aside. You'll be reusing that later. And then you can pull out this complete handle. Now inside, there is a small white bushing. You can see that. You'll want to reuse that as well. Make sure that doesn't get caught in there. And you can usually wiggle it out. So we'll set this aside as well. Then what you want to do is this outer sleeve. You can just push that up and out of the way, and that makes enough room to access it with your socket. Now you want to take this to a vise. I've already done that conveniently and loosen this up so I can remove it. And once you get that loosened up, you can just completely remove it. And what's going to be inside here is this has a small piston, and it's got a spring in it. So you'll take all these parts out. There's the retainer, Here's the spring. And inside's a little piston. Now you can usually get that out with your fingers. If not, you might need a little pliers. So I'm having a little issue here. But we got it eventually with our fingers. Pliers would help there. And then you can set this aside as well. Installation is just the exact opposite of what we just did. You take your kit that you got, and I would contact FasTest to make sure you get the proper kit. Different connectors require different materials in this kit. Oxygen connectors would have a Monel pin, and depending on your connector, you will need different seal materials as well. So do contact Fast Sales and get the proper kit for this. But it goes in exactly the way it came out. First thing you'll do is grab your brand new piston here, stop pin, push it down, carefully guide it in as to avoid any damage from the threads that are on there. Just make sure it's centered. Take your spring, place it over the pin, and take your stop pin retainer and go ahead and thread that down. And then once you get close, go ahead and use your socket, tighten it the rest of the way down, and then take it to a vise and torque it to 10 to 12 foot-pounds or 14 to 16 Newton meters. Now that we've got that installed, slide the outer sleeve over where it needs to go there. Now we've got that in there, and then we reinstall our handle. So take the pieces that you had, make sure your bushing is over the screw or the part of the handle that goes in there, and the handle goes on this right side of the connector here, and you will need to push down this outer sleeve as you install it. So I'm going to try to do that here for the camera with this safety latch on the cable style connectors. You'll need to make sure that that is disengaged. So I'm pushing the latch here open so that I can move this outer sleeve down, and then you attempt to install. So that's in there, and now the connector works the right way. Make sure that your handle's oriented properly. And now we'll have to get this other cam installed here. So again, we're gonna have to push down on the outer sleeve to make room for it. You'll have to line up where that square is gonna engage. You can also see from a top view here that these two NPT plugs are going to line up. So you get them to line up there, give them a little squeeze, and hopefully it'll engage. Just like that. And I saw that fall into place. Take that screw that you did remove earlier and add one small drop of Loctite. Just very small. You don't want to overdo it. And then reinstall the screw. In this case, it'll be that same 1/8 inch Allen wrench. And then you can install this, and if you have a torque wrench, it'd be great to install this to 6 to 8 foot-pounds. And then your stop pin replacement is complete. Your connector is ready to go back into service. If you have a bent or damaged RPV pin, or potentially the spring inside, you won't be able to extend and retract the pin as necessary. It may not even line up and enable a proper connection. So we do offer kits to replace the pins. This is the RPV pin tool. This is part number G580 RPVPT. You use this to extend and retract the pin as shown, and also you can remove this top nut on the 580s and the 540s. They are different. The same tool works for both the 580 and 540. The 580 side of the tool here is a little larger. Now this is a 5/16 span there, and the 540 side is smaller, and that is a 1/4 inch flat to flat, and those are meant to line up with the flats on the piston nut up here. So for the 580 side, we'll just line it up here, and you can remove it. Doesn't matter if the pin's extended or retracted. You may find it easier to push the pin down, but you just get it loose there, and this nut does come off fairly easily. So your O-ring is now going to be loose. You can save that for later or replace it with a new one if you think that's necessary. But the pin itself is here inside the nut. So you can take this out and replace it with the new one. We also have kits in case these nuts ever get damaged that include the nuts. We also have kits that include the spring that's down in there. This spring, make sure that pin stays extended and is rigid enough to actuate the RPV valve inside the cylinder valve. So we have kits that include all of that. Installation goes the same way it came out. So go ahead and drop your spring back in. You can reuse that if you needed to, or replace it with a new one. I do like to insert the pin inside the nut before I install it. You can extend it, that way you're not fighting the spring as much, so have it in the extended position here. If you did have it in the retracted position, you'll be fighting that spring inside it, and it just makes it a little easier so that you're not having to fight it. So go ahead and just put that in. The threads should start engaging without fighting the spring. Go ahead and cinch that down all the way, and then you can use your pin tool once it bottoms out just to give it a little extra snug. And we'll get that there. Now, if you did have a torque wrench with the proper settings, we're looking at 3 foot-pounds, 36 inch-pounds, 4 Newton meters there. And again, this is 5/16 for the 580s and 1/4 inch for the 540s. And don't forget to put your O-ring back in, and then this connector is good to go. And for those kits, please do contact FasTest, Fast Sales, for the proper kits for your connector and needs. Thanks.
Well, that about covers the FasTest family of bail connectors. But before we go, we're going to put up some do's and don'ts and tips and tricks on the screen. Feel free to pause the video and review that. Full operating instructions are available on our website, and you can also order replacement parts for these connectors.
And if you have any questions or concerns that are not covered in these documents, feel free to reach out to Fast Sales.
Thank you again for being a valued FasTest customer.
Thank you.